A black U.S. general was unlawfully arrested. Then the Pentagon responded. The rise. A boy named Elijah. Elijah Nathaniel Brooks was born on an unusually cold spring night in April 1973 in Birmingham, Alabama, a city steeped in civil rights history and haunted by its scars. His mother, Loretta Brooks, was a public school teacher. His father, Tyrone, a Vietnam veteran and church deacon, was a man of quiet strength. Their small home was modest, but rich in love, history, and discipline. Elijah's early years were defined by church pews, Saturday morning cartoons, and the scratchy records of Mahalia Jackson. But it was his father's war medals, kept neatly in a velvet-lined box in the attic, that lit the first spark in his young heart. He would often sneak up there, open the box, and stare at the Bronze Star, wondering what kind of man earned such honor. By 10, Elijah could recite the names of every U.S. president and every major general in the Army since World War II. He wasn't just fascinated by the military. He was drawn to its purpose, order, justice, and courage. But growing up black in Alabama wasn't easy. Elijah knew the code, how to speak when stopped by police, where not to go after dark, how to keep his temper under a tight lid. His father's mantra, "Son, be twice as good just to be seen as equal," echoed through his life like a drumbeat. By high school, Elijah was a straight-A student, captain of the debate team and quarterback for the Rams. But it was ROTC that captured his soul. In his uniform, he stood taller. He walked differently, not arrogantly, but with a quiet confidence that others followed. Even then, some whispered, "That boy's going places." They were right. West Point and war zones. Elijah's acceptance to West Point felt like a revolution in the Brooks household. No one from his family had ever been north of Tennessee, let alone attended one of the most prestigious military academies in the world. At West Point, he faced a different kind of pressure, one not just of grades and discipline, but of race and perception. Affirmative action cadet, some sneer behind his back. Elijah didn't retaliate. He outperformed them instead. He graduated top 5% of his class, earning respect even from those who doubted him. His early assignments took him to Kosovo, then Iraq. He didn't seek glory, but leadership. Soldiers under his command said he never asked them to do something he wouldn't do himself. By the time he was a colonel, he had 3 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, and the undying loyalty of thousands. His promotion to brigadier general made national headlines. First black general from Alabama in over 2 decades, the papers read. But it wasn't his color that mattered to him. It was the flag, the oath, the lives he swore to protect. The wrong stop. It was a warm Saturday evening in July. General Elijah Brooks, now 51, had just finished speaking at a veterans event in Raleigh, North Carolina. He was in civilian clothes, khakis and a polo, driving his 2023 Chevy Tahoe back to his hotel. He never made it. At 8:42 p.m., 2 white officers pulled him over for failure to signal. What happened next would shake the nation. Dashcam footage later showed that General Brooks was calm, compliant. He identified himself, provided ID, even offered his business card. But something, maybe his skin, maybe his car, maybe their own fear, triggered the officers. They pulled him from a vehicle, shoved him to the ground, and zip-tied his hands behind his back. One of them placed a knee on his neck. It lasted 41 seconds. It would have lasted longer, but a jogger nearby had pulled out her phone. She live-streamed it on Instagram. Within minutes, millions watched in horror. The world reacts. You have the wrong man. As officers forced Elijah into the back of their cruiser, one of them scoffed, "You should have complied quicker." Elijah, bloody lip and all, simply said, "I did." Back at the station, it took over an hour before anyone believed his identity. When they finally ran his military ID, the silence was deafening. The shift supervisor turned pale. You're a general?" "I was," Elijah said coldly. "I don't know what I am now." They released him without charges, without apology, and without dignity. By then, the video had reached CNN, MSNBC, and every major outlet. The headline blazed across screens. Black U.S. general handcuffed and pinned by police in traffic stop gone wrong. The footage couldn't be denied. The Pentagon took notice. The Pentagon responds. General Margaret Ellison, Joint Chiefs Vice Chair, was awakened by her aide at 3:17 a.m. "You need to see this," he said, handing her a tablet with a live stream video. 10 seconds in, she whispered, "Dear God." Within 24 hours, Secretary of Defense Kenneth Markham issued a rare public statement. An American general, a decorated war hero, was unlawfully detained and assaulted. We are demanding full accountability. Behind the scenes, it was even more explosive. Calls were made. Internal affairs units mobilized. The president was briefed. And for the first time in over a decade, the Pentagon launched an independent investigation, not into a foreign adversary, but into the unlawful treatment of its own. Generals in protest. In an unprecedented moment, over 40 current and retired generals, black and white, marched together in Washington, D.C., not in uniform, but in unity. They held no signs. They spoke no words. But their silence screamed louder than any bullhorn. News anchors called it the most solemn protest in American military history. The son of two Americas, Major General Elijah Isaiah Grant was born on August 14, 1972, in Montgomery, Alabama, a city steeped in contradiction, soaked in civil rights history, yet scarred by the bitter remnants of segregation. His mother, Patricia Grant, was a third-grade teacher who taught her students with unmatched passion and discipline. His father, Charles Grant, had served in Vietnam and came home with 2 medals, a wounded leg, and a silence that never fully left him. Growing up black in the South was not easy. Elijah learned early how to walk with his head high, even when the world tried to make him bow it. He learned how to be polite when others were not. But more than that, he learned how to fight with honor in the quiet, methodical way his father had once fought in the jungle. By 12, Elijah had memorized the speeches of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. By 16, he'd already scored a near-perfect SAT. And by 18, he stunned his entire high school when he earned an appointment to West Point, one of the first young black men from his district to ever do so. But Elijah wasn't aiming for first. He was aiming for better. Storms in uniform. West Point was no playground for idealism. It was rigid, cruel at times, and full of the kind of unspoken bias that hid behind perfectly pressed uniforms. Elijah didn't crack under pressure. He refined it into power. While others doubted him, he thrived. His grades? Top 5%. His physical fitness? Elite. His leadership potential? Unquestionable. He became known as a general's general. A young man so inspiring that even the coldest instructors took notice. By graduation, he was offered multiple postings and chose to serve in intelligence with deployment to conflict zones where he could protect soldiers and civilians alike. Over the next 25 years, Elijah would rise, not because of favors, but in spite of every challenge. He led special operations teams in Afghanistan. He negotiated hostage releases in West Africa. He briefed presidents. And eventually, he made history. The youngest black man ever to reach the rank of Major General in the U.S. Army. But what happened on a quiet Thursday evening in 2025 would shake the nation in a way no battlefield ever had. The arrest. It was supposed to be a quick drive. Elijah had just spoken at a closed-door symposium on national security at the University of Virginia. He was in full uniform, medals pinned, shoulders squared, and hat folded neatly on the passenger seat. Just before 9 p.m., his black Escalade rolled through a small suburban town in Virginia, one with a quiet reputation and a not-so-quiet history of profiling. A routine drive until he was pulled over. Body cam footage would later show the officer, a white man named Officer Ron Delaney, approaching the vehicle with aggression that immediately seemed out of place. He didn't see the uniform. Or maybe he did and didn't care. Step out of the car. The officer barked. No explanation. No reason. Elijah, ever calm, asked, "Is there a reason for the stop, officer?" Out of the car. Now. Hands where I can see them. Within 90 seconds, America's youngest black general was thrown against his own SUV, cuffed with plastic ties, and forced to ground, all while wearing the uniform of the United States Army. And it was live-streamed, not by Elijah, but by a teenager across the street who started filming the moment she saw the lights flashing and heard Elijah's voice, calm, direct, respectful. And that footage, it went viral in less than 2 hours. 7 million views before dawn. The footage was raw, unedited. No filters, no fancy angles. Just shaky hands, a teenager's horrified whispers, and the undeniable image of a decorated black U.S. general being slammed to the ground. By midnight, it had been reposted over 4 million times across TikTok, Instagram, and X, formerly Twitter. The caption? Simple. This man said he's a general. They didn't even listen. They just cuffed him. Within hours, hashtags like hashtag General Grant, hashtag respect the uniform, and hashtag unlawfully arrested trended worldwide. At 2:43 a.m., a former Marine tweeted, "That's Major General Elijah Grant. He led us out of that minefield in Kandahar. I'd follow him into hell." And they arrested him. By morning, every major news outlet had picked up the story. Cable news rolled the footage on a loop. People began sharing stories about the general, speeches he gave at high schools, the children of soldiers he had helped support during deployments, widows he had written personal letters to when tragedy struck. The country was angry, but not just angry, ashamed. And inside the Pentagon, phones were ringing. A lot. Echoes in the Pentagon. Secretary of Defense Andrew Morales stared at the pause video of General Grant on the briefing screen. The room was silent, save for the subtle hum of fluorescent lights. Generals, admirals, policy aides, civilian overseers, all gather for a sudden, classified briefing. "This," Morales said, pointing to the screen, "is not just a mistake. It's a disgrace." A 4-star general chimed in. "He's not just respected. He's revered. Among our allies, too. This is going to spiral." It already had. Dozens of active duty soldiers, some still overseas, had posted statements in support of Elijah. Retired generals issued joint open letters demanding accountability. The Joint Chiefs began to question whether silence was complicity. But it wasn't just military voices joining the chorus. Civil rights leaders, congressional lawmakers, even conservative veterans groups, all united in fury. For the first time in a long time, America was speaking with one voice. And that voice was saying, "This man deserves justice." He speaks. Elijah was released without charge 4 hours after the arrest. No apology, no explanation, just cold silence and bruised wrists. He didn't go home. He didn't hold a press conference. He went to Arlington. At sunrise, he walked, still in uniform, to Section 60, where the most recent fallen soldiers were laid to rest. He knelt beside a grave of a young soldier who had died under his command and whispered a few words. Then, and only then, did he speak. A single camera crew from a local station happened to be nearby, and when they asked him if he had anything to say, he replied, "I've served this country for 30 years. I've seen war. I've lost brothers and sisters in battle. But nothing prepared me for the war. I came home to fight in my own streets, not as a soldier, but as a black man." That 26-second clip broke the internet. White generals, black brothers. What shocked the world next was not just a public outrage. It was who stood beside Elijah in the days that followed. 5 retired white generals, including 2 with deep ties to conservative administrations, issued a historic joint press conference. If a man like Elijah Isaiah Grant, who has bled, served, and sacrificed, can be treated this way, what does that say about us? About our country? We do not condone this, and we demand accountability. For the first time in modern military history, active duty officers began writing anonymous op-eds, expressing their loss of faith in civilian policing protocols near military bases. Several veterans turned political figures introduced emergency legislation to protect active duty and retired service members from unlawful police action. Meanwhile, black military leaders, many of whom had endured quiet racism in silence for decades, began to speak up. What had once been just a video became a movement, the officer's record. When Officer Ron Delaney's personnel file was leaked, the findings ignited further rage. 12 prior complaints of excessive force. for instances of racial profiling claims. One formal warning for failure to follow de-escalation protocol. He had never faced real consequences. Until now, within days, the Department of Justice launched a federal civil rights investigation. The Virginia State Police removed Officer Delaney from active duty. The governor called the incident a systemic failure of character, protocol, and justice. And still, Elijah remained calm, stoic, dignified. He never called for vengeance, only truth. The Senate hearing. The Senate chamber was packed. Every network was broadcasting live. The room fell silent as Elijah approached the stand, his uniform sharp, posture perfect, eyes calm. He spoke for 22 minutes about service, about sacrifice, about the hidden war Black Americans still fight, even in uniform. He quoted Lincoln. He referenced Frederick Douglass. He told the story of his father, his mother, his own journey. And then he ended with this. The uniform I wear is supposed to protect me, but the color of my skin almost cost me everything. We cannot call ourselves a land of the free while still practicing selective justice. The room erupted in a standing ovation. Even senators who had previously dismissed the video as overblown were wiping away tears. 7 million views before dawn. The footage was raw, unedited. No filters, no fancy angles, just shaky hands, a teenager's horrified whispers, and the undeniable image of a decorated Black U.S. general being slammed to the ground. Within the first hour, it had 80,000 views. By 3 a.m., it had crossed 7 million. The hashtags trended globally. Hashtag General Grant. Hashtag He Served You Still Tackled. Hashtag Justice for Elijah. People didn't just see a man being arrested. They saw the weight of centuries. A uniform that should have protected him meant nothing to that officer. That was the outrage. That was the pain. Retired generals, Black, white, Latino, took to Twitter and called the incident an abomination. Celebrities, athletes, foreign diplomats, all demanded answers. The teenager, whose name was Ava Richardson, found herself on every news outlet before the day was over. She didn't want fame. She wanted accountability. The Pentagon's quiet fury. Secretary of Defense Carol Bennington watched the footage in silence. Then she called the president. "This doesn't just look bad," she said. "This is a stain on our institution." Within hours, the Pentagon's press office released a rare midnight statement. Major General Elijah Grant is a decorated American hero. What occurred on August 14th is not only unacceptable, it is a disgrace. An internal investigation has commenced, and we are cooperating fully with civil authorities. But behind closed doors, the fury was nuclear. Generals began calling governors. Former Joint Chiefs began meeting behind the scenes. Not since the Don't Ask, Don't Tell debates had the military's upper brass been so united. And this time, they weren't divided along party lines. When generals speak out, General Marcus Llewellyn, a 4-star general near retirement, stunned the world when he made an unscheduled appearance on CNN that night. He looked into the camera and said, "That man wore the flag, served it with honor, and the fact that his skin color still made him a suspect tells you all you need to know about what we're still fighting in this country." More generals followed. More truths were told. This wasn't politics. This was patriotism, reclaimed. For the first time in modern history, 7 active duty generals signed a joint statement calling for justice. Not just for Elijah, but for all officers of color who'd ever been treated like they didn't belong in the uniform they bled for. It seems like I can't do more advanced data analysis right now. Please try again later. But let's keep going with the story manually. Here's the continuation from where we left off. The officers who vanished. 2 days after Elijah's arrest, the city's police department reported a technical issue. The body cam footage from the arrest was missing. But the Pentagon wasn't playing defense anymore. Unknown to the local authorities, the Department of Defense had already secured copies directly from the source through encrypted cloud backups tied to federal surveillance compliance protocols. Quietly, 2 officers involved in the incident were removed from duty. No press release, no public apology. Then came the first internal leak. One of the officers had a long history of racially motivated complaints. buried under years of bureaucracy. But now the world was watching, and what was buried began to surface. The general refuses silence. Elijah Grant was no longer just a general. He was a movement. He was offered settlements, honorary medals, even quiet retirement with full benefits, if he would just step away. He refused. What happened to me happens to men and women every day who don't wear stars on their shoulders. I won't be quiet just because I finally got notice. He began speaking publicly, at Howard University, at West Point, at high schools across Georgia and Pennsylvania. His voice became a national anthem for resilience. The Senate hearing. Elijah stood in the U.S. Senate chambers, his dress blues immaculate. He testified before the Armed Services Committee. His voice was calm, clear, unwavering. Systemic racism, he said, is not a theory. It's a lived experience, even for a general. His words echoed across the nation. Millions watched. The president tweeted support. An emergency session was called to review racial profiling within federal law enforcement. A letter from the White House. 3 weeks after the hearing, General Elijah Grant received an envelope, hand-delivered, no stamp, no return address. Inside was a letter written on White House stationery. General Grant, your courage under pressure reflects not only the discipline of our armed forces, but the conscience of our nation. What happened to you was a disgrace. What you did after was a lesson in grace. Let us meet. President Abigail Norwood. It wasn't a political stunt. This was personal. President Norwood, the first woman to hold the office, had a son in the Navy. She knew the culture. She knew the silence that followed injustice. And she knew Elijah's stand was more than symbolic. That meeting, held behind closed doors, would change policy forever. The Pentagon memo. The following Monday, a classified memo circulated within the Pentagon. Immediate mandate. All military police units, federal law enforcement bodies working with DOD, and civilian contractors must undergo advanced anti-bias training effective immediately. All reports of racial profiling or misconduct must be filed through a new independent review board, led by civilian and military oversight. The memo wasn't leaked by accident. It was sent, on purpose, by a staffer who believed the world needed to see that change was real, not performative. Elijah didn't comment. He didn't have to, because in those words, everyone saw the first real reform in decades. The ones who reached out, after his testimony in the presidential meeting, letters poured in not from generals, but from privates, cadets, former recruits, and retired veterans. A letter from a young black cadet at West Point read, "Sir, I was going to quit. I thought the system would always hate me. But then I saw you, and I knew I could stay. I could fight from inside." Another came from a white Marine colonel. "General, I owe you an apology. I've said things in silence that I would never say aloud. But silence is betrayal too. I'm teaching my sons better because of you." Each letter fueled Elijah's new purpose. He wasn't just a soldier now. He was a teacher, a bridge, the police chief who cried. 6 months after the arrest, the chief of police from the department responsible for Elijah's assault appeared on national television. He was flanked by attorneys, PR reps, and his badge was noticeably absent from his chest. "I failed," he said. The interviewer asked, "Because of public pressure?" "No," he replied. "Because of truth. Because I watched a man stand in front of the Senate and speak with more integrity than I've ever mustered in 30 years of service." He resigned that day, and he wept. For some, it was too little, too late. For others, it was the first tear of accountability. But for Elijah, it was never about revenge. It was about responsibility. A school in his name. A year later, in a quiet corner of Atlanta, Georgia, a new military preparatory school was founded. It bore his name, the General Elijah Grant Institute for Leadership and Justice. The opening ceremony was small. Family, friends, and 58 freshman cadets of all races, religions, and genders. Elijah stood before them and said, "I was once told I didn't belong in this country's uniform, that I didn't look like a leader, that I'd only ever command shadows. But I've learned this. If you carry yourself with honor, even when dishonor surrounds you, The world will follow. Don't just wear the uniform. Earn it every day. And when you face injustice, don't lower your head. Raise your voice. That speech went viral too, not because it was loud, but because it was true. The last promotion. At age 57, after nearly 4 decades of service, Elijah Grant was called back to Washington, D.C. for what he thought was a private briefing. Instead, he walked into the Pentagon's Hall of Honor, where all 5 living Joint Chiefs of Staff stood in full dress uniform. A voice over the loudspeaker announced, "By order of the President of the United States, and in recognition of extraordinary service and sacrifice to both the nation and its moral conscience, Brigadier General Elijah Nathaniel Grant is hereby promoted to Major General." The room erupted. Tears rolled down his cheeks, not for the stars on his shoulders, but for what they finally represented: acknowledgement, dignity, justice. A nation reflects. News channels across America broadcasted Elijah's story again. Not the viral video, not the body cam footage, but the full arc, from a boy raised in Alabama by a single mother who scrubbed hospital floors, to a high school dropout who joined the Army to escape poverty, to the first black commanding officer of the 82nd Airborne Division, to a man tackled and humiliated in the street, and who still chose to rise without bitterness. Social media filled with hashtags. Hashtag General Grant. Hashtag he didn't break. Hashtag serve with honor. Documentaries were made. Textbooks revised. Conversations held at dinner tables and in Congress alike. America didn't just learn Elijah's name, they remembered it. His quiet battles. But not everything healed with applause. Elijah often walked at night, alone. The trauma lingered, not just the physical bruises, but the emotional echoes, the nightmares, the moments when he'd hear footsteps behind him and instinctively brace for attack. The memory of the handcuffs. Cold, tight, too tight. His wife, Denise, stood by him through it all. She once told a reporter, "People celebrate him now, but I saw him when he couldn't sleep, when he paced until 4 a.m., when he questioned everything. His strength isn't that he stood tall in front of the Senate. It's that he stood it all in our kitchen, every day, choosing to heal." The funeral he attended. 3 years later, Elijah received a folded flag, not for himself, for Sergeant Marcus West, one of the 2 officers who had tackled him during the unlawful arrest. Marcus had been fired, dishonorably discharged from the reserves, and later diagnosed with PTSD. He died by suicide. Elijah attended his funeral, quietly, without cameras. When asked why, he said, he was lost. The system failed him, too. He was a soldier once. And even those who fall deserve someone to mourn them. He placed a white flower on the casket. No words, just presence. The award he never wanted. Years passed. Elijah grew older, grayer, slower. One spring, he was presented with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Civilians clapped. Soldiers saluted. His grandchildren ran into his arms after the ceremony. But in an interview the next day, he said, "This medal is beautiful, but I'd trade all to go back to that day and be treated like a human being, not a suspect, not a threat, just a man walking to his car." That quote was etched into the walls of the Civil Rights Museum in D.C. Right below it, a photo of Elijah, in uniform, smiling, standing with both hands resting on a folded flag. Elijah Grant retired peacefully in a small home in Savannah, Georgia, surrounded by family, books, and students who visited often to hear stories. He started a podcast called Command with Courage, where he mentored young officers and interviewed other leaders about moments they nearly gave up. It became a top-rated show on military networks and among youth. He lived long enough to watch his granddaughter become a fighter pilot. He died at 89, holding the hand of his wife, listening to Sam Cooke's "A Change Is Gonna Come" playing on vinyl. The parade that followed. When Elijah died, the Pentagon lowered its flags to half-mast. Thousands lined the streets for his funeral procession. Civilians, veterans, active duty personnel, children with signs that read, "Thank you, General. You showed us how to stand tall." The final image broadcast across the world showed his casket draped in an American flag, carried by 6 generals, black and white, united in reverence. A quote from his final speech appeared on screen. Justice doesn't start in courtrooms. It starts in the heart of one person who chooses not to look away. And America, for once, didn't. This is Dark Case Diaries, where depth are shown. Kindly like, share, and subscribe. Thanks a million. Till next time, stay tuned.